The mornings came slowly for Isabel now. She would wake before the sun, staring at the faint light pressing against her curtains, wondering if her body would obey her again. Each movement was deliberate, rising from the bed, steadying her trembling hands, waiting for her legs to remember what standing felt like. The years had settled on her like a heavy blanket, her back bent slightly forward, her breath shallow, her strength a fading memory. Yet she carried herself with quiet dignity, even when no one was watching. Sometimes she would whisper to herself, "You made it through another night." But even those small victories felt hollow. The days stretched long, each one indistinguishable from the last. She looked around her small room, the worn table, the faded curtains, the crucifix on the wall. Everything seemed tired, like her. "Lord," she murmured, her voice barely above a sigh. "I'm still here, but I don't know why." There was no reply, only the soft hum of silence, deep, familiar, almost kind. But somewhere beyond that silence, he was listening. Pain had become Isabel's shadow. It was always there, some days dull and patient, other days sharp and cruel. Her hands, once quick and gentle, now ached when she reached for the smallest things. Her knees protested every step. Even her heart hurt, not from sickness, but from years of missing what was gone. She had known loss too many times, her husband, her friends, her own youth. It was as if life had been slowly unthreading her, one goodbye at a time. She tried to hide her groans, even from herself. When the pain became unbearable, she would close her eyes and whisper, "Just one breath at a time, Isabel, one breath." Sometimes she imagined what peace must feel like, a life without ache, without effort. But the thought made her feel guilty. She didn't want to give up, she just wanted the hurting to stop. In her loneliness, she would trace the lines on her palms and remember the years they had held, the faces, the laughter, the work, the prayers. "I've carried so much, Lord," she said softly one evening. "Do you still carry me?" The question lingered in the air, unanswered but not forgotten. Her world had grown smaller with time. The chair by the window had become her universe, her place of prayer, her place of tears, her place of watching the seasons change without her. Each morning, she would settle into it slowly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The chair creaked, old and faithful, like a friend who had seen too much but stayed anyway. From there, she watched life go on. Children walked to school, neighbors waved from a distance, the mailman left letters she no longer expected. She was part of the world, yet apart from it. The view was always the same, the narrow street, the crooked tree, the sky that changed its colors, while hers stayed grey. But still, she sat there, because the window was her only reminder that life still moved. Sometimes she would press her hand against the glass, whispering, "Do you see me, Lord? I'm still here." The wind would move the curtains slightly, and though she didn't understand why, she always took it as an answer. At first, Isabel waited for visitors. She kept the small table near her chair clean and ready, a place for 2 cups of tea in case someone stopped by. Her nieces used to come once a month, bringing small gifts and hurried smiles. The neighbors sometimes knocked to ask how she was doing, but as the months turned to years, those visits became memories. One by one, the footsteps faded, the letters stopped, and the phone stopped ringing. She told herself they were busy, that life had simply carried them along. "It's not their fault," she would whisper, setting out her cup anyway. But the empty chair across from her began to feel like an echo of her own solitude. Sometimes she imagined hearing a knock at the door, only to find it was the sound of the wind. Once she even baked bread, convinced her niece might visit that Sunday. No one came. When night fell, she sat quietly in the dim light, her tea long gone cold. "Everyone forgets eventually," she said softly. "I just didn't think it would happen so soon." But heaven had not forgotten. Someone was already walking the long road toward her soul. Prayer used to come easily to Isabel. Her mornings began with songs, her nights ended with gratitude. But now her prayers felt heavy, like stones she carried to her lips. She would start strong, folding her hands carefully. "Lord, I thank you for this day." but halfway through her voice would fade. The words felt distant, lifeless, as though she were talking to an empty room. "Are you tired of hearing me?" she asked once, tears trembling in her eyes. "Because I'm tired of talking to the dark." She had prayed for healing, for comfort, for company. But the pain stayed, the loneliness lingered, and the silence grew thicker. Sometimes she sat in her chair and simply sighed, the kind of sigh that says more than words ever could. Her heart spoke where her mouth could not. Yet in the unseen realm, her sighs were being heard as prayers too deep for language. And though she didn't know it, her silence was sacred, because God often answers not with sound, but with presence, and his presence was drawing near. One evening, after another long day of pain and quiet, Isabel sat staring at the candle burning low on her table. The flame wavered, fragile, and she saw herself in it, tired, flickering, almost gone. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she whispered. "Every day feels like another mountain. Every night feels longer than the last." Her voice cracked, but she kept speaking. "If you want to take me, Lord, I won't fight it." The candlelight trembled as though listening. Tears began to fall, not loud but steady. They landed on her hands, thin and trembling. "I just don't want to suffer alone anymore," she said. "I don't need miracles. I just want to feel you here." Her body slumped, her spirit weary. She had reached the quiet edge of surrender, not out of despair, but exhaustion. And that's often where heaven begins to move, where the end of human strength meets the beginning of divine mercy. The flame steadied again, brighter than before. And though Isabel didn't see it, the Comforter had already entered her room. That night, the weight became too much. The pain in her body pulsed with the ache in her heart, and together they formed a sorrow too deep to carry any longer. Isabel folded forward in her chair, her hands gripping her shawl as if holding herself together. Her whisper broke into sobs. "Jesus, please," she cried. "I can't bear it anymore. I'm so tired." Her voice filled the little room, raw, desperate, trembling. It wasn't the kind of prayer found in books. It was the kind that escapes the soul when words run out. No one heard her, not the neighbors, not the world beyond her walls. But heaven did. The sound of her weeping rose through the silence, reaching the one who had promised never to turn away from the broken-hearted. After her tears slowed, she sat still, trembling, her breath shallow. "I don't even have the strength to ask for help anymore," she whispered. And somewhere, unseen, a presence stirred. Not far away, but near. The Comforter had heard her final cry and was drawing close, not with power, but with tenderness. The house fell silent after her tears, the kind of silence that feels alive, not empty, but waiting. Isabel sat in her chair, her eyes closed, too weary to move. Her mind drifted between pain and peace, between despair and hope. Then something changed. It began as warmth, faint, gentle, and real. It touched the air first, then her skin, then her heart. It wasn't the warmth of a blanket or a candle. It came from somewhere deeper, like the breath of peace itself. Her breathing slowed, her hands stopped trembling, and in that stillness, a strange calm settled over her. She didn't see light or hear a sound, but she knew someone was there. Not a memory, not a dream, but someone living, compassionate, near. Her heart whispered without words, "Jesus," and the silence, that sacred, holy silence, answered back without sound, "I am here." She wept again, but this time her tears were not from pain. They were the kind that come when a soul finally realizes it has never been alone. Isabel opened her eyes. The candle had burned low, and shadows danced softly on the walls. Yet the room seemed to glow with something unseen, a quiet light that came from nowhere yet filled everything. She didn't see him with her eyes, but she felt him, near enough that she could almost reach out and touch him. Her breath caught. "You came," she whispered. No voice replied, yet her heart filled with an overwhelming peace that spoke louder than words ever could. It was the kind of peace that moves through pain without erasing it, a peace that sits beside suffering and makes it bearable. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes, letting the warmth envelop her. "I thought you'd forgotten me," she said softly. "But you were here all along, weren't you?" And in that moment, her loneliness ended. The aches remained, but they no longer ruled her. The same Jesus who had comforted the weary in Galilee now sat quietly in her little room. No less real, no less kind, no less present. And for the first time in years, Isabel felt held. The hours slipped by, but Isabel didn't notice. She sat still, eyes closed, the soft candlelight painting her face with gold. Her heart no longer raced with fear or sadness, only stillness. In that quiet, something deep began to speak, not from the air, not from her mind, but from the center of her being. "I have seen your pain." Her eyes filled with tears. The words were not heard, but known, as if they had been waiting inside her all along. "You have not suffered alone. I have been with you in every tear." A trembling sigh escaped her lips. She covered her mouth, weeping softly, not from sorrow, but from the shock of being understood so perfectly. The voice continued, steady and gentle, "You do not have to be strong. I am your strength now." Her pain didn't disappear, but it changed, became lighter, almost holy. She had prayed for years for answers, but this was better than answers. This was presence, and in that still, wordless communion, Isabel knew that Jesus was not a distant Savior. He was the one who sits beside those who suffer and whispers peace into their pain. That night, Isabel dreamed. In her dream, she stood on a quiet shore, the waves rolling gently at her feet. A figure approached, tall, calm, clothed in light that seemed to breathe. She couldn't see his face clearly, but she didn't need to. She knew him. He reached out his hands toward her, hands marked with love, with sacrifice, with eternity. "You've carried your pain for so long," his voice said softly within her. "Now, let me carry it." She hesitated. "But Lord, I have nothing left to give you but my hurt." He smiled. She could feel it, even in the light. "Then give me that. I make broken things whole." As he touched her hands, warmth flooded her, not the warmth of healing flesh, but of a healed soul. When she woke, her cheeks were wet with tears, and her heart was lighter. The pain was still there, but it no longer felt cruel. It had become the place where Jesus had held her. For the first time in many years, Isabel slept deeply. No tossing, no restless turning, no tears against her pillow, just peace, full and gentle, the kind that feels like being watched over. If someone had looked into her little room that night, they would have seen the faint glow of her candle, still burning though she had fallen asleep. Its flame did not flicker, though the air was still. It burned steady, calm, unwavering, alive. And though no human eye could see him, there was another there, sitting quietly beside her bed, unseen but undeniably present. The comforter who had promised to never leave now kept watch over her, through the still hours, through the silence, through her sleep. When dawn came, the light touched her face and she smiled in her dreams. She was no longer weary. The night that had begun in loneliness had ended in rest, because love himself had stayed. The next morning dawned soft and golden. Isabel opened her eyes slowly, as if waking from a long, deep peace. The room looked the same, yet it felt different, lighter, gentler, touched by something unseen. She sat up, her joints still stiff, but her heart strangely buoyant. She glanced at the candle on her table, its wick spent but its scent still in the air, faint and sweet. She whispered, "You stayed." Her voice trembled, not from doubt, but wonder. For years, mornings had felt like burdens, another day to endure, but this morning felt like a gift. The light streaming through the curtains seemed almost alive, as though it were carrying his presence. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. "Thank you," she murmured, "not for taking away my pain, but for being with me in it." Outside, the birds began to sing. Their melodies blended with the morning air, turning her small, quiet home into a chapel. And though she was still alone in the world, she no longer felt lonely, because she knew now she would never face another sunrise without him. That day, small things began to shimmer with meaning. When Isabel opened her door to fetch her mail, She found a loaf of warm bread sitting on her step, wrapped in cloth. There was no note, no name, just the bread, simple, fragrant, kind. She smiled and whispered, "You sent this, didn't you?" Later, as she sat by her window, a young neighbor passed by and waved. It was the first wave she'd received in months. Something in her heart stirred, not sadness this time, but gratitude. She noticed the sunlight dancing on her tea, the breeze moving gently through her curtains, the laughter of children echoing down the street. Life hadn't changed, but she had. The small mercies of the day were no longer coincidences to her. They were comforts. Each one carried the quiet signature of Jesus, written not in words, but in warmth. By the time the evening came, Isabel was smiling. "You're still with me," she said softly, "even in the little things." And somewhere unseen, he smiled back. That night, Isabel sat by her window once more. The same chair, the same street, but now her eyes saw differently. She no longer looked for what was missing. She began to see what was present. The stars above her flickered like soft promises, each one reminding her of the hand that had held her through the dark. "I didn't think I could go on," she whispered, "but you've shown me that I can, because you're here." Her hands rested on her lap, open, no longer clenched by fear. She began to pray again, but not with heavy words or desperate cries. Her prayer was simple, almost like breathing. "Thank you, Lord. Just thank you." The ache in her body was still there, but it no longer ruled her. Pain had become the rhythm of a heart that knew peace. She leaned back, looking at the stars. "You turned my loneliness into your presence," she said softly. "You turned my pain into your home." And in the quiet she felt his answer, not in words but in warmth, "And I will stay." Days passed gently, and the peace in Isabel's home did not fade. It didn't depend on mood or weather or strength. It simply stayed. Every morning she felt it, that quiet warmth in her chest, that sense of being watched over. She would sit with her tea, close her eyes and whisper, "You're still here, aren't you?" And always, without fail, the air around her seemed to answer, not with a sign, but with stillness. She realized that the comfort Jesus brings isn't loud or fleeting. It doesn't visit and leave. It dwells. Even when pain came, and it still did, she met it differently. "We'll get through this," she would whisper, speaking not to herself but to him. Her house, once echoing with loneliness, now breathed peace. She no longer feared the long afternoons or the quiet nights. The Comforter had made his home with her. And though her body was frail, her soul stood stronger than it had in years. Isabel was no longer waiting for someone to save her. She was living with the one who already had. It was a grey morning when someone knocked at her door, a soft, hesitant knock. Isabel shuffled slowly to open it, expecting perhaps the mailman or a stray delivery. On her porch stood a young woman she barely recognized, the new neighbor from 2 houses down. Her eyes were red, her hands fidgeting nervously. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't mean to bother you. I just didn't know who else to talk to." Isabel smiled gently and stepped aside. "Come in, dear." They sat at the little table by the window, where once no one came. The young woman spoke in bursts about her loneliness, her fears, her feeling that God had forgotten her. Isabel listened quietly, her heart aching with recognition. When the girl finished, Isabel reached out and took her hand. "He hasn't forgotten you," she said softly. "He found me when I thought no one would, and he'll find you too." Tears filled the girl's eyes, and for a long moment neither spoke. But something invisible filled the room, something warm, familiar, holy. The same comfort that had once entered Isabel's pain now moved through her, reaching another heart. After that day, the young woman began visiting often. Sometimes she brought bread, sometimes flowers, sometimes just her company. They would sit and talk for hours, laughing, crying, praying. Isabel noticed how her own heart had changed. The bitterness that once clung to her had melted into compassion. Every time she comforted another, she felt Jesus closer, as if his hands were moving through hers. One evening, after her visitor left, Isabel sat quietly and smiled. "So this is what you meant," she whispered. "You didn't just want to comfort me. You wanted to teach me how to comfort others." Her eyes filled with gentle tears. "You healed me by making me a vessel of your love." She leaned back in her chair, watching the candle flicker softly. Her pain was still there, her body still weary, but her heart was full. The loneliness that once crushed her had become a doorway to something divine. And in that small, quiet house, Isabel realized she was no longer merely surviving. She was sharing the comfort that had saved her. The evening came, calm and silver, the kind that invites reflection rather than sorrow. Isabel sat by her window once more, the candlelight soft against her face. The street outside was quiet, the world slowing to rest, and so was she. There was no fear anymore. The shadows that once frightened her now felt gentle, like old friends. She smiled faintly, her hands resting over her heart. "You've stayed through it all," she whispered. She remembered every night of pain, every tear that had once fallen into silence. They no longer hurt to recall. They had become sacred memories, proofs of his faithfulness. The house around her glowed softly, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the peace she'd found. She breathed deeply and said, "You've been my comfort through every hour. I have nothing left to fear." The candle flickered but didn't waver. It burned steady, just like her faith. And as darkness folded gently over the world outside, Isabel leaned her head back and smiled. "When you call me," she whispered, "I'll be ready." There was no dread in her words, only peace. Because love had cast out the fear that once ruled her nights. Morning came softly, golden and kind, but Isabel did not rise. She sat as she had so many mornings before, in her chair by the window, hands resting calmly on her lap, her face serene. The candle on the table had burned down to its base, leaving only a curl of fragrant smoke rising in the still air. Her neighbor found her that way later, peaceful, radiant, her Bible open beside her, a faint smile on her lips. "She looks so happy," the young woman whispered, tears falling quietly. And she was, and because the one who had comforted her through every lonely hour had finally whispered her name once more, not as a visitor this time, but as a friend come to bring her home. Her pain was over, her loneliness gone. The comfort she had felt in shadows now filled her with everlasting light. And though her little house grew quiet again, it was not the silence of absence, it was the echo of presence. The same Jesus who once sat beside her in her suffering now held her in his arms forever.